This is the Life Sciences Leadership Show. I'm your host, Michael Piperno, and I'm a leadership communication coach and facilitator who specializes in the life sciences industry. On each episode of this show, I interview industry leaders from organizations of all sizes about their leadership journeys. My goal for the show is to help you gain leadership insights and knowledge that'll help you in your own life sciences leadership journey. Okay, on with the show. Today, I'm joined by Nathan Teuscher, president of Aplos Analytics and a global expert in pharmacokinetics, clinical pharmacology, and drug development. Nathan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's very enjoyable to speak with you again, Michael.
I appreciate that. So everybody, I first met Nathan when we were preparing for a high-stakes FDA advisory committee meeting, and I was struck by his ability to really tailor the message in the moment to what the stakeholder needed to hear, especially when it was communicating really complex concepts, and he was just able to craft clear, compelling messages that were really on point for the audience. So I was impressed by Nathan, and we've stayed in touch, and we've had a couple really great conversations specifically about speaking science, especially when you're speaking science in a business world or a non-necessarily scientific setting. So that's why I invited him on the show today to talk a little bit more about that, because everybody knows that that's what I love to help people do as well. But Nathan, first, let's tell my audience about your leadership journey to date and how you got to where you are today with your company, Aplos Analytics.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And I actually remember our first interaction really well because I showed up, I flew in, I was at the meeting, and then our first interaction was where you gave me constructive criticism. And usually that's not a fun thing, but the way you delivered it was extremely effective. In addition, I was open to it, and I think that made a huge impact on me. And we've been, fast friends and colleagues ever since. So, first thing is, don't be afraid of constructive criticism. Come with the right attitude. People are trying to help you most of the time. And if you listen to it with that in mind, you're going to hear it as a help rather than as a tearing down criticism.
Yes, so, totally.
Yeah, I love that with our first interactions.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. My background, I'm a scientist. I got a master's and a PhD in clinical pharmacology and pharmacokinetics. I was going to do research and development. And I remember one of the things I struggled with was presenting data and information in meetings with people. And I remembered something, I was talking with my wife about it, and she was a school teacher at the time. And she said, you have to teach in a way that the kids understand. That's why I teach principles in multiple different ways. When you're counting, some people understand fingers up in the air. Some kids understand blocks in their hands. Some kids understand with actually writing numbers on a piece of paper. So you teach the same concept multiple ways because different people learn through different mechanisms. And, so what a second grade teacher taught me, I realized applies to a lot of business applications.
Sure does.
It just took me some time to kind of understand that. And so as a scientist, I began to implement that in a lot of my work. And then I learned that I didn't really love the science in and of itself for science sake. What I loved was helping other people do science or understand it or become more effective. And so I started doing things like I started a blog called Learn PKPD that became very popular and was purchased by another company. I got into consulting, I got into software development, and now recently, a few years ago, I started Aplos Analytics, which is a software development company with the purpose of simplifying data analysis through software to make it easier for people to do. So while not communication, it is the idea of saying, hey, how do we take results or data, turn them into results more easily with less effort to make it more efficient and free up people to have conversations rather than stick their head in a computer and pound a keyboard all day? How can they talk with people about the findings of the results? So it's been an interesting path. I would have never thought, 30 years ago that I would be founding a software development company, but here I am, and I really love it and enjoy it.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so funny what you said about, when you're talking about what your software does, simplifying data analysis so you can have conversations about it. And yeah, not necessarily the same as communication, but actually, yeah, the same as communication. When you're communicating, especially complex science, You're the expert. You have it all in your head and you've lived with the data and you understand it and you're passionate about it and you care about it. But in that moment, it actually is about helping someone else spend less effort trying to understand you.
Yes.
That's why one of the reasons that, one of the things, even back to when we first met, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, but everybody does it in life sciences. You put so much on the slide and you just want to make sure that you prove that you haven't missed a thing and it's all there and they'll get it because, they're in the industry. But if you don't pare that down to make it less effort for them to skim and understand, they're not going to be listening to you anymore. They're going to be trying to figure it out.
Yep, exactly. No, it's, I always ask myself when I have a slide is, what do I want the person to know from this slide? And whatever that is, that's actually the title of my slide. So I put full sentences in my slide titles because that's the first thing they're going to read. And if they read it, they've got what I wanted out of the slide. Now, I may need data to support that. I may need other pictures and things like that. And that's totally fine. But when we communicate, the goal is, what do I want this person to know from what I'm presenting? So how do I tell them that? How do I get them, not the information, but how do I help them know? How do I let them know this is what I want you to know? And, we do this all the time in normal communications when we're talking with our friends and our colleagues, hey, I'm going to be late for dinner tonight because, I'm backed up in meetings. So I can't be there at 6. I'll be there at 6:30. Why are you telling them that? Well, because you don't want them waiting around for you and upset and stuff. But we don't do that same thing with our scientific communications. We try to tell them how important the meeting is that we're currently in, instead of saying you're going to need to delay the start of your clinical trial by 3 months because I have a manufacturing issue that I'm working through. And that's what they need to know, but you're trying to tell them about all the complexities of your manufacturing issue.
Yeah, you bury the key message by giving them all the backstory before you hit them with the key message. And that's frustrating. I mean, think about when you ask someone a question and you get the long and winding road story before you actually hear the answer, yes, no, or it depends. That's very frustrating. And it's the same when you're communicating in a meeting, in a one-on-one, in a high stakes, very public meeting. If you're not helping them understand what your point is up at the top, you're going to lose them or you're going to frustrate them. And I like how you talked about leveraging the slide title to send the key message. That's something I coach people to try to do as much as possible, is use that to send that key message. Tell them the point before they start what I call the sense-making process. It's like, what am I looking at? What's on this slide? Okay, I've seen that before. But because if they're doing that work, again, that's making it hard rather than making it easy for them to do.
Yep.
What other pitfalls do you see when it comes to scientists when they're preparing to communicate with different audiences or different stakeholders? Like, what are some of the things you've seen, or what are some of the things you've actually learned?
I think one of the biggest challenges people have is they assume that their audience has a similar level of knowledge and expertise that they do. And almost always that's wrong. The audience doesn't have your expertise. That's why they're asking you to speak with them. Even in you go to a conference in your discipline, the reason they're asking you to speak is because you're an expert in something that they're not. And so I think that expectation of sort of equivalent knowledge base creates a problem, and it creates a gap that unless you traverse that gap for them, you're going to leave people confused. And so I think it's easier to picture it when you're talking with a diverse group of people. So you're talking with a project team where you have many different disciplines presented. You're like, of course, I'm a discipline expert and they don't understand this discipline, so I need to help them understand. But in almost every conversation, that's the true situation. You're an expert in something and you need to communicate it. That's one of the reasons I like analogies when I'm communicating, especially if I feel like they don't quite understand what I'm saying. Trying to come up with analogies that they can relate to helps them understand your point. And sometimes you have to really think about analogies ahead of time and bounce them off people, and you're going to have
Yeah.
some really terrible analogies. That's fine. But when you do that, even if it's a bad analogy, it shows the listener that you're trying to explain it in a different way, and you're trying to help them understand. And they can even come back and say, well, that doesn't make sense because of this and this. And you're like, oh yeah, you're right, but let me explain it differently. And you can get it back and forth. And then that's real communication that's happening.
Yeah, definitely. And you started your answer there by talking about being audience-centric. And that's something that I try to pound into people all the time is that, and my listeners have heard me say this before, but it's so important when you're communicating. I don't care if you're sending a Teams or Slack message, you're composing an email, you're doing a presentation, you're getting ready for a conversation. Think about your audience, who they are, and what they know, what they don't know, and then what they need to hear from you for you to be effective in getting in that communication, whether it's just to educate or train, or if it's to inspire, or if it's to persuade or convince. If you're thinking about the audience's needs and not just your own, you're going to naturally be more effective in that. And then people challenge me on that. It's like, well, how can I think about exactly what they need when I'm trying to figure out what I need? Well, don't do it at the same time. Figure out what you need to say, what you need to convey. But then step back and look at it from the lens. Okay, can they absorb this? Or what do I need to do to make this applicable to them? Whether it's bringing in those analogies or stories or examples, or maybe just simplifying. A lot of times it's simplifying. Because what you were describing, we call the curse of knowledge. Like, you know so much, but you've got to meet the audience closer to where they are. And you are there because you're an expert. But you're also sometimes there, I find, especially with these scientific communications when I coach people, you're there to connect the dots and tell them the story that you see that they might not be seeing.
Yes. Yep.
In the data. Because a lot of times what I see is people throw it up like, okay, here's what we saw. Here are the results. Yep. It's obvious, right? No.
No, it's not.
It's not obvious. And we want you as the audience, we want to hear what you are seeing, what this means to you. And then maybe we can get on board with you that it means the same to us.
Yep. Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things there is telling the audience, hey, this is why this is important to you. So I do pharmacokinetics. So I analyze drug concentrations in the body. So one of my conclusions might be is, we ran a study testing the effect of food on drug absorption and found that food increases drug exposure 3-fold. That's our finding. That's our result. How I would put it in a presentation would be, in our drug label, we need to say, don't take this with food because it'll triple the amount of drug exposure. And then hey, this is our conclusion. We'll need to adjust our drug label to say, don't take this with food. Here's why. Someone's going to, a physician, a clinical operations person is going to understand that. Oh, we have to restrict food. Wow, that's going to create some problems for us. How are we going to do that? And then they could say, well, why? Can you show me why you came to that conclusion? Sure. Here's my key result. And I can show them that key result. So that's part of it, is put it in their terms. How does this result affect that person? But then also you can work backwards from that and say, well, what's the key data that supports that? You can show them that. You don't have to tell them the journey of how you got to that data. A lot of scientists want to say, these are the 30 steps I took to get to this answer. Nobody really cares what those 30 steps are. They want to know what the answer is. They're trusting you as an expert. If they want to drill in, did you do it right? You should be able to back in and say, well, I did this, and then I did this. It addresses their concerns. But most scientists want to say, I started at A, and here is the timeline path of how I got to the answer with all of the wanderings that I did. Because it was a really exciting journey. Nobody really cares about your journey. What they care about is the answer. So that's one piece. Another is the complex, the drug development complex, how it works. If you work in a department, and so you do some work in your department, and then you're preparing to present it outside of your department. So what do? You review it within your department with other people that are like you.
Right.
So you prepare a presentation and these people give you comments and your manager gives you comments and the head of the department says, these are the things we're going to say. It's all within the department and nobody is considering the question you said is, what does the audience need to know? Who's the audience? Because it's all these people that think the same. And so they prepare this fabulous presentation that you then go give to this different audience that isn't in your department. And everybody goes, what?
What?
Well, that's boring. Why do we need a meeting for this? I don't understand. And then the department head gets feedback and says, well, that was so confusing and we didn't understand. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. We don't think about the question you said is, who is my target audience and what do they need to know, and preparing it from that. What you should be doing is probably having a few people from your department and people outside your department and say, here's a presentation I'm trying to give. Can you give me feedback on it, before I present it to this big group? And getting their feedback saying, I don't understand that. Okay, I got to change that. I got to do something different, and adjusting it. But too often the departments want to control the information.
Right.
And so that's why they don't let anybody see it outside of their group. And I think that siloization is a huge problem in drug development. That's why large pharma companies take so long to do things, is because they go through these multiple departmental layers, reviewing information, making presentations that people outside the department don't care about.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because, I mean, you can't do this for every single presentation that you do, but when we're prepping for a high stakes meeting, like when we met, you have everybody in the room, everybody thinks the messaging's right, and then guess what? We put it in front of a mock panel of people who are more realistically likely to be thinking like our audience, and boy, do you learn a lot. You learn what's confusing, you learn what's not landing, you learn what you're going to be challenged on. So that's one piece of advice for anyone, and you just gave it, but I'm going to underscore it because it's so important. If this is a high stakes presentation and the result is make or break or matters significantly, you better be testing it with people outside of that core group. You better be testing it with people who are somewhat representative of the brains of the audience who are actually going to receive that communication.
Yep. And that was actually that constructive criticism that when we first met that you gave me was, I won't say the specifics, but hey, Nathan, when you did this, you lost these people over here because you were watching the listeners. I was talking. I can't watch 10 people on a video screen, but you were watching them and you said, hey, when you said this kind of stuff, Nathan, half these people tuned out. They looked away. They weren't interested. You lost them. And that was, I could feel real hurt when you said, I could have felt hurt when you said that, but I'm like, whoa, I need those people to understand that. So what I said didn't engage them. How can I say it differently? And then we worked through some solutions and we made improvements. And so I absolutely agree with that is testing with individuals that are like your target audience is really, really helpful. And what's really funny about this is in clinical trials, we do this all the time. So when we test drugs, we get representative patients to enroll in our trial because we don't want everyone to be the same. We want different ages. We want different body weights. We want different disease severities. We want different locations in the world because we want to understand how the drug works in all these different types of people. So we do that in clinical trials. We understand that from a scientific perspective, but it comes to communication and we're like, no, if they're not in our department, they can't hear it until we're ready, right? So we do the exact opposite. So it's almost comical to me how we don't apply the same principles, scientific principles that we use for testing drugs or any other sort of scientific endeavor. We don't apply that to communication, and we should.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, communication is a science in my book. So, I mean, it's something we should be doing more of, but we don't. And I think it's because of some of the reasons you said about, we want the data to be more perfect, or we don't want input from outsiders who could derail things, or whatever it is. But I think a lot of it boils down to how you kind of started this conversation about our first interaction is being open to feedback, being open to constructive feedback. And that's one of the things in my work. Like when I met you, you were open to it immediately. I mean, we were at a point where we had no choice. It was like go time. Okay.
Yeah.
But for me, a lot of times when I'm coaching people, especially people who are very senior, who don't think they need my help, they say, oh, this communications guy, like he's coming in. I've been presenting for 25 years. I'm not going to learn anything from him. And I have to be very patient with that for them to see value in what I have to say and trust me before they will trust me. And I think I see that inside corporations and pharma companies and biotechs as well, is that it's like, this is my domain. So I don't really want too much of your feedback until I'm ready to share with you, the information that I want to share with you. And I feel like that's a mistake. But here's what I'll say, and I'll let you go. Here's what I'll say to that is, just because you're getting feedback doesn't mean you have to use it all.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So, and that's the same like when we do high stakes meetings preps and we have a mock panel. Yeah, you're going to get all these different perspectives. It's like in the old days when you would have people look at your resume and you get 25 different pieces of advice on what you should be doing. Well, yeah, you take all that in, you consider this is how these people saw it. How do I make my changes so that it works for us and people like them? It's not like you have to change everything based on everything you heard.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Fully agree. And I think some of that is, wow, you had a lot of things fire off in my head when you were sharing that.
That's why I'm taking notes while you're sharing with me.
I think sometimes individuals feel that these key decision points in their careers are like a video game, that it's either you pass this level or you're dead and it's game over. Okay. And so they approach it that way, and there's a lot of anxiety around it, and they want to get it absolutely right. And if they don't get it right, it's game over, right? That's how they feel. And it's a legitimate feeling. And what I want to tell people is life isn't game over. It's not like these video games. You can have you got meetings that go really horribly and terrible, and they can go bad. And you're like, well, that's not what I wanted to have happen. Your career's not over. Your life's not over. There's going to be other opportunities, and it doesn't mean that you are right to do it that way or wrong to do it that way. You can learn from that, right? And so so I think that's one piece in communication that's important, is whatever the meeting is, it is a high stakes meeting. That's fine. And you might have a failure because of your high stakes meeting, but it's not the end. There's going to be something else. There's always more opportunities, but if you can take those sort of failures and learn from them and say, wow, I thought I did everything right, but it failed. What could I have done differently? And you might find out there was nothing you could have done. It was completely out of your hands. Or you can learn, hey, the way you approach that situation really turned somebody off, and you could have done it differently, and it maybe would have changed the outcome. It doesn't mean go revisit that decision. It means take that information and use it in your next situation.
Exactly.
Right?
Carry it forward.
Yeah, carry it forward. So I think I see a lot of people that get a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress around these key events. And I want to tell them, it'll be fine. No matter the outcome, good or bad, it'll still be fine. If it's bad, let's learn something from it and let's step forward. If it's good, let's learn something and congratulations. But it's not an end of game, video game over, you failed. You're not a failure.
I love that. Yeah. And sometimes you learn from failure, and you said this, sometimes it's like, oh, there's nothing else I could have done. It's time to just like say that stunk and move on. And also, a lot of times the fear of failure is also rooted in the feel of being seen as imperfect, as chasing perfection. And I always tell people, like, don't try to make your presentation just super perfect. Try to make it matter to the people who are hearing it. That's way more important than you being absolutely perfect in your delivery, in your script, in your words.
Yes. And I'll say a word, trust. That's in communication, I think, is very vital. Now, trust is different we're not talking about an audience of 300 people. A lot of communications, most communications are small groups, 3-5 people or less, right? If you can build trust within those small groups, it creates something that's unbelievable, in my opinion. So when you're in a small group and you're like, oh, I made a mistake on that, I put this number on and it's the wrong number. I'm sorry, I'll go fix that. When you do something like that and say that, the people in that small group go, oh, okay, I can trust when there's a mistake that person is going to own it, and they're going to say they're going to fix it. So if they say down the road, no, that's the right number, I'm going to now trust that because I've seen it before where it was the wrong number and they said, that's the wrong number. I made a mistake.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
All these little interactions, if we can be sort of honest and truthful and with people, we build trust. And when we build trust, we get grace from them, right? And that grace as a listener goes, I don't really agree with that, but I trust this person. I'm going to listen a little bit longer.
Right. Yep.
And the more we can do that, I think the better our relationships are, our working relationships are. And I think this is really important for managers.
Yes.
Because if managers cannot jump down somebody's throat when they make a mistake, can say, hey, is that number right there? I remember a different number. Oh, no, I don't know. It's okay if it's wrong. I just, can you go check that? Because we want to make sure it's right in the, before we get it outside the department or something. Can you check that for me? Yeah, I can check it. Check it after the meeting. That's fine.
Right.
If you allow people to know it's okay to make a mistake and own it, as a leader, all of a sudden they're going to trust you as a leader and say, oh, he's not going to rake me over the coals for every little mistake. So I think trust is a really important part of communication, but it's built with little Lego bricks over time.
Yeah. Oh boy, let me unpack some of that because what you just dropped there is half of what I coach people and teams on. So yeah, I mean, trust is so important, and I agree with you. But what I heard and what you were talking about is a lot of other concepts and words that leaders need to be really thinking about. Humility, that we don't have all the answers, and when you make a mistake or you don't know something, it's better to be open and transparent about that than to try to, spin and cover it up. All right. Vulnerability, being willing to admit that you made a mistake. And then psychological safety is another thing. Like, it's okay in this environment on this team to mess up and to own it and to fix it. Because if your people, well, we're getting into much more than speaking science here, but listen, this is important for life sciences leaders everywhere. If your people feel that they can make a mistake, own it, and fix it, that's where innovation is going to happen. That's where growth is going to happen. Because if you've got a bunch of people who are afraid to make a mistake, number one, or who are afraid to speak up when they see something that's not right, whether it's clearly not right or whether it's gnawing in their gut it's not right, if they don't feel safe with you and they don't trust you in those moments, guess what they won't do? They won't bring it up.
Yep.
And then something will go kaboom later that could have been prevented. I see it all the time.
Absolutely. 100%. And, just a recent experience in my company is, I had a communication with the group and I had expressed some, concerns that I had and some plans for the future. And, 2 weeks later, somebody came back to me and said, hey, I talked to someone else and they're really worried about something that was related to what I had shared. And I said, oh, I had no idea, and I thank you for sharing that with me. That's not what I intended, but I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I took time, the next opportunity, to talk to that person with concerns and said, hey, are you concerned about this? I didn't say who told me, what they told me. I just asked them, are you concerned about this? And the person said, oh, a little bit. They didn't express as much concern, but I think they were nervous,
Right.
And I said, hey, I didn't mean to, create concern. Let's talk about what I meant and what I was trying to communicate. And we had a great conversation, and the individual's like, okay, I'm not as concerned now. So I reflected back on my communication, my original communication. There was nothing wrong with my original communication. Could I have changed it? Yes. I mean, anytime you can change it, but there really wasn't anything wrong with it. But this person had a reaction to it because of their current situation that I wasn't aware of that created concern for them. But I had a team member that was willing to talk to another team member and was willing to communicate with me. And then I was willing to go back and communicate with them. So we've created this trust relationship where it's okay to share concerns, but it's also okay to discuss them. And it's also okay to bring them out in the open so that people can get more comfortable even when there's difficult things happening. Now, that wasn't created with a new person that I worked with for a week. We've been working together for 9 months.
Right.
And it's just now happening. And so there's a time required for this. But I'll be honest, the words you said, humility from leaders, humility creates trust faster than anything I've ever seen. Humility and transparency. And it's okay as a leader to say, I know the answer, but I can't share that with you because management has asked me not to.
Right.
So this is what I can tell you.
Right.
Okay, they're going to believe
way.
you now. It goes a really long way to say a couple of things. Okay, they know the answer. They told me I can't share it, and they told me why. But also, I appreciate that there's a reason for that. So if I say something to that manager and say, please don't share it, here's why, they're going to do the same thing for me.
Right.
It's almost like exponential, the benefit that trust creates in communication and leadership.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, I want to shift gears and get back to just something you said earlier, and I'm kind of thinking back to another discussion we had outside of this podcast, but I'll tell you what I mean in a minute. See, I'm not being clear. I'm not top-lining for you what's coming, but I'm trying to tell a story here. So you said your wife, it was one of the things that clicked for you was when your wife said about how, the students learn differently, and made me think back to when I was trained as a teacher in the theory of multiple intelligences and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so people experience things, they learn differently, and you have to explain concepts in different ways. That sounds like that was a moment that mattered to you in your communication journey. Was there a time in your career where you really clicked for you about how to, I don't want to say transcend, but how to be a better communicator? Like when in your career did you really learn the power of translating this scientific and data-driven communication into things that people who are maybe non-scientific or in a business world, how did you become that translator? Because you really are that today.
Great question. I think it started when I was at a company and I had so I think this isn't going to be scientific, but I think I need to put some groups names in it. So I do pharmacokinetics. I analyze blood concentration data and to understand how the drug gets into and goes out of the body. So that's what I do. And that's what I was doing at this company. There is a group called the bioanalytical group. They're the group that take the actual blood sample, they run it through fancy machines, and they generate a concentration value for that blood sample. And then they give me that data and I do my work. So it's kind of the people that prepare the stuff that I use for my analysis. So they provide me my inputs and then I do my work. And I was working with them because there was some frustration about when they were providing data to us and how they were providing it. And they were wanting to know why we were asking for things. And there was some frustration on their side with what we were asking them to do. And so I sat down with the leader of that group, and we had multiple conversations, and he was frustrated and I was frustrated. And I just decided, look, I got to work this out with this person. Mm-hmm. It was a nice person. He's a friend today, but I need to make this work. And I just told him, I said, look, I want to make this work. I can see we're both frustrated. How do we make this work? And he just said, I don't understand what you're talking about. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I said, okay, well, let me figure out a way to explain it better. I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about it. We went around 2 or 3 times with different explanations. And then he's like, oh, this makes sense now on one of them. So that was the instance that kind of prompted this, and part of this discussion with my wife happened at this time that I was having this relationship. But then what really hit me was I started a blog at the same time, and I thought maybe other people are interested in this. So this was early 2000s, blogging was cool. So I started a blog, and you look at it and you're like, is anybody listening? Right? I had no idea if people were listening to or reading it or not.
Right.
What's interesting is 10 years later, I'll have people I do not know walk up to me at conference and like, you wrote that blog. I read that all the time. Thank you so much. And that was the validation that what I was doing was valuable. And I realized, oh, wow, this is valuable to a lot of people, but I had no idea. I didn't know that people were using this and consuming this information. But when that happened that first few times, I thought, oh, wow, this is a problem that I can help solve.
Right.
And so I've tried to do more and more of that. So I have a podcast now. I have other things to talk to people because I think there's a paucity of that in the scientific space. And I'm trying to contribute to that. In my little corner of the world, I try to contribute to that.
Yeah. Well, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing. I have to give you compliments on your podcast because it's not meant for me. But when I listen to it, I can actually understand what you're talking about. You break down the concepts in a way that even someone who's not a trained scientist like me can follow.
Well, and that's the point of it is to make my science relevant to others, because if it's relevant, then they can say, I understand why they do that. So, I mean, just current context, people ask why is the FDA doing this and why are they doing that? And the FDA doesn't need to do this and they don't need to do this. And why do we even have animal studies for drugs? And well, there's really good reasons. But if the general public doesn't know that, then the general public's going to think it's not worth anything. So we need to do a better job of communicating why this is an issue. Hey, animal studies, why do we need them? Well, because we don't want to put humans at unnecessary risk of unknown drug compounds that might hurt them. And so we try to test them in animals first to make sure they're safe. Now, can we reduce animal use and use fewer animals? Yes. We should reduce the number of animals, but we don't want to hurt people first, within the first instance. General public, I tell general public about that. They're like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense because it's plain language that you're using.
Exactly.
Right.
And so I think we need to do overall a better job of, hey, this is my little scientific niche. Why is it important?
Right. Awesome. Nathan, I always love my conversations with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm always amazed at how the time flies when we chat.
It does. Why don't you just take a moment and tell people how they can learn more about you and your company and your podcast?
Yep. So my company is Aplos Analytics. That's APLOS Analytics, and aplosanalytics.com. And Aplos is actually a Greek word for simplify. So if you go to aplosanalytics.com, you'll learn about our software that we have for pharmacokinetic analysis. And you can also catch my podcast. It's a clinical pharmacology podcast with Nathan Teuscher. Go to Spotify, go to Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find it. I release one episode a month. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. If you search for Nathan Teuscher, you can find me there as well. So I'd love to talk to people. If you want to connect with me and chat about your industry or understand something, I'm always willing and open to help and give people some time and chat with them. I love doing that because I learn a lot by chatting with other people.
Love that, Nathan. So listen, everybody, you heard Nathan has a podcast. You're listening to my podcast. Please subscribe or favorite or like us on those networks. And then also give us a nice rating because that helps other people find our podcast when you do that. And everybody, if you're a life sciences leader looking to sharpen your leadership communication skills or prepare for high stakes meetings, I'd love to talk to you. So be sure to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn and on my website at wearecomvia. That's COMVIA.com. We'll see you all next time. Thanks again, Nathan.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the show today. If you enjoyed it, please rate it on your favorite podcast platform and tell one colleague or friend about it. Thanks. We'll see you next time. The Life Sciences Leadership Show is brought to you by the ComVia Group, experts in leadership communication coaching and training for life sciences leaders. Learn more at www.wearecomvia.com. That's WEARE, ComVia, COMVIA.com.